Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. After years of friction, is the India-China relationship witnessing a reset thanks to the relentless onslaughts on India's economy and strategic autonomy by US President Donald Trump? China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is currently visiting India, and the visit is being widely seen as an attempt by both countries to repair and strengthen bilateral ties that were severely damaged by the deadly border clashes in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh in June of 2020. This comes at a time when Trump has unleashed the terror of tariffs on the world, especially with the clear intent to brazenly target India, thereby triggering uncertainty everywhere. In the course of his two-day visit to New Delhi, the Chinese Foreign Minister has met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. The statements that have emanated from the two sides sound reassuring and promising. As per the statement issued by the Chinese side, Wang Yi told Jaishankar, "The world is undergoing a once-in-a-century transformation at an accelerating pace and dealing with bullying." In fact, in a clear reference to the United States and Trump, though they were not named, the Chinese Foreign Minister said, "Unilateral bullying is rampant and free trade and the international order face severe challenges." He went on to say that as the two largest developing countries, India and China should set an example for others by uniting, strengthening themselves and promoting a multipolar world. Wang Yi added, the two countries should view each other as partners and opportunities rather than adversaries or threats, pointing to the resumption of dialogue between the two neighbors and recent peace in the border areas. The Chinese Foreign Minister said the bilateral ties are on a positive trend. Jaishankar told his Chinese counterpart, "Having seen a difficult period in our relationship, our two nations now seek to move ahead. This requires a candid and constructive approach. We must be guided by the three mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Differences must not become disputes nor competition, conflict." Significantly, ahead of this visit, China took the decision to lift its export restrictions on fertilizers, rare earth minerals, and tunnel boring machines. It has begun the shipment of these critical items to India, addressing concerns that had been raised by New Delhi in the past. Earlier, China had imposed these curbs, citing security concerns and strained bilateral relations with India. While this move is a confidence-building measure, ahead of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to China at the end of the month for the SCO summit, where he is expected to hold talks with President Xi Jinping, it is no surprise that the noticeable thaw in India-China ties comes at a time when the Trump administration is doing everything in its power to destroy the India-US relationship. A critical strategic partnership that had been painstakingly built over 3 decades. Trump has imposed 50% trade tariffs on India, the highest for any of America's trading partners. This includes a punitive tariff of 25% for buying Russian oil. Never mind the fact that Trump's closest aides tie themselves up in knots every time they're asked to explain the administration's double standards on this issue. Just a few days ago, during his Alaska summit with Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin publicly stated that trade between Russia and the United States has grown by 20% since Trump returned to office earlier this year. India has repeatedly pointed out that the US continues to import uranium, fertilizers and other chemicals from Russia. The volume of their bilateral trade runs into billions of dollars. The European Union continues to buy large volumes of Russian oil and gas, and China is the largest buyer of Russian oil in the world. Yet, while Trump has extended the tariff truce with China, he's singling out and punishing India. And look at the magnitude of the hypocrisy. Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, recently claimed in a newspaper article that India's oil lobby is funding Russia's war machine. Accusing India of cozying up to Russia and China, Navarro said, if India wants to be treated as a strategic partner of the US, it needs to start acting like one. This as he chose to stay silent on China's purchases of Russian oil. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio took the double standards to the next level when he claimed that India buying Russian oil adds to Russia's war chest, but China buying Russian oil stabilizes the international oil market. Therefore, penalties for India, but no such secondary sanctions for China. Can you imagine such staggering hypocrisy? Or shall we call it mind-boggling stupidity? And to think that India is being singled out for doing business with Russia at a time when Trump himself has chosen to roll out the red carpet for the Russian president and even hinted that there will be no further sanctions imposed on Moscow even as the war in Ukraine rages on.
Having seen a difficult period in our relationship, Excellency, our two nations now seek to move ahead. This requires a candid and constructive approach from both sides. In that endeavor, we must be guided by the three mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Differences must not become disputes, nor competition conflict.
There has been an upward trend. Borders have been quiet. There have been peace and tranquility. Our bilateral engagements have been more substantial. And we are most grateful to our leaders who, in Kazan, in October last, were able to set a new trend. And we have profited a lot since then.
Overall, I'm very pleased to meet you again in New Delhi for this round of talks between the special representatives of China and India on the boundary question. The setbacks we experienced in the past few years were not in the interests of the people of our two countries. And then in October last year, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi had an important meeting in Kazan. That meeting pointed the direction for the development of our bilateral relations and provided impetus for the proper settlement of the boundary question.
So what do these geopolitical developments indicate? Let's put that question with our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Dr. Swaran Singh. He's Professor for Diplomacy and Disarmament at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome back, sir. Great to have you with us. Also joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Einar Tangen. He's a geopolitical and global economy commentator. He joins us live from Beijing. And completing the panel tonight is Michael Kugelman. Michael is Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center. A warm welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Since Michael has to leave the show in a few minutes, I will start with him. Michael Kugelman. The question on everyone's mind is this. We see Wang Yi on a two-day visit to India. He's met with Prime Minister Modi, Jaishankar and the National Security Advisor. By all indications, Prime Minister Modi is headed to China at the end of this month to attend the SCO summit, where he is very likely to hold talks with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines. Everyone's asking, have the dragon and the elephant finally decided to do the tango thanks to a bully called Donald Trump? What's your take?
Yeah, thanks, Neha. So I think that the context is important here. We've seen indications of an India-China thaw going back to before President Trump was even reelected. If you'll recall, back in October of last year, India and China signed a border deal, a border patrolling deal, which really brought down a lot of the tensions that had arisen during the deadly Ladakh crisis in 2020. And one can track a series of events going back quite some months, again, before Trump came back to power, before he was even reelected. The two sides had agreed very early this year to resume direct air flights, a decision that was implemented just recently. My view is that India and China wanted to be able to create more diplomatic space to allow for efforts to increase the commercial relationship between India and China, which is sizable, has always been sizable. There's a very deep trade relationship. But I think that India recognized the advantages that could come to India's economy by opening up India to more FDI from China. FDI from China had been subjected to significant levels of scrutiny since the Ladakh crisis. We'd heard last year, I believe it was last June 2024, India's chief economic advisor essentially calling for more Chinese investment in India. So I think that there were economic motivations that originally drove this thaw. But I think if you look more toward recent weeks and recent developments, absolutely, I think that the direction that the U.S.-India relationship is going in and the uncertainties about the U.S.-India relationship have prompted India to consider that it needs to hedge against that uncertainty and look to continue to ease tensions with China. Also look back to March of this year, before US-India tensions became what they are now. Prime Minister Modi in a podcast, I'm not sure, I don't remember the name of the podcast. He did a podcast in which he essentially said that the border has been normalized with China and that we want to look toward more cooperation and engagement with China. So my point, my bottom line point is that yes, we are seeing a significant thaw between India and China. It has been driven recently in great part by the situation with the US-India relationship and Trump's tariffs on India. But the origins of this thaw go well before the current moment and indeed well before Trump came back to power.
Well, yes, the thaw certainly set in, I think, sometime last year in the month of October. But let me ask you this, coming back to the present situation, and really things seem to be in such turmoil at the moment. But let's look at some very important facts, Michael. Donald Trump decides to roll out the red carpet for the Russian president in Alaska, thereby ending his Western isolation and granting him legitimacy and recognition on a global stage. Putin, at the same summit, publicly declares that Russia-US trade has grown by 20% since Trump was re-elected to office earlier this year. Yet you have a situation where Trump decides to extend his tariff truce with China, the largest buyer of Russian oil, while choosing to single out and punish India with 50% tariffs for committing the grave sin of buying Russian oil. Peter Navarro says it is India's oil lobby that is funding Russia's war machine. And Marco Rubio makes it a lot worse by saying India buying Russian oil fattens Putin's war chest, but China buying Russian oil stabilizes the international oil market. So I want to ask you a straight question. Have you witnessed a greater example of such staggering hypocrisy?
Well, I'm sure there's a greater example somewhere, but yeah, absolutely. These are double standards. And you'll remember, Neha, that during the Joe Biden administration, the U.S. ambassador to India at the time, Eric Garcetti, essentially said that India's decision to import Russian oil was stabilizing global oil markets. And now we've come full circle where the Secretary of State is saying that China's decision to import Russian oil is stabilizing markets. So it's hard to make sense of all of this. But no, it's absolutely hypocrisy, double standards. I certainly acknowledge that. It's also a pressure tactic, right? I mean, the Trump administration has decided that it can get away, or thinks that it can get away with trying to pressure India to back away from Russia as a means of, by extension, pressuring Russia to agree to a ceasefire or to a peace deal in Ukraine. I mean, the idea here from the Trump administration is that Russia will feel compelled to do what the U.S. wants it to do if it sees that a key commercial partner like India is distancing itself from Russia. Of course, that's not going to happen. We know that, given the nature of the India-Russia relationship. and other factors. And as I think I've told you on your show before, I do think that some of this is an issue of personal grievance for President Trump, that he's unhappy with the Indian government for a variety of reasons, and therefore he's willing to single out India for this special treatment. But the final point I'll make is that, if in terms of what Rubio said, that's a reflection of, I think, an acknowledgement from the Trump administration that China is a very significant global economic player, and perhaps he was signaling that he believes that China is a more impactful, more significant global economic player than India is. And I think it also reflects that the Trump administration does not really have a coherent policy toward China yet. On the one hand, it talks about wanting to compete with China, but on the other hand, you hear officials, including Trump, say that the U.S. wants to partner with China for peace and security. So, we might be seeing the U.S. looking for some type of détente with China, and that could be reflected in this decision to go soft on China, so to speak, and not try to apply significant pressure on China as it is with India.
Well, clearly, we can see that happening because Trump has adopted double standards vis-a-vis India and China. And what an irony, considering that for years, the US invested in a deeper relationship with India, believing that New Delhi could be a strong counterweight to China. But now it is busy wooing Beijing and punishing New Delhi. It's also interesting you said a few minutes ago that Trump seems to have acted out of pique. Most of us here in India believe that it's personal, the way he's targeting India. Perhaps he's very upset at being denied credit for the ceasefire between India and Pakistan and for the fact that India has chosen not to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize. But that apart, final question before we let you go, Michael. There is a lot of talk now about a resurgence of sorts of RIC, the Russia, India, China understanding, as it were. Do you believe that today we are in a situation where the ongoing geopolitical tensions and realignments are very likely to lead to a scenario such as this? Or does it sound far-fetched to you?
Well, I mean, I do think a lot is changing with the global order. That's very clear. I mean, not surprisingly, President Trump and his policies have really upended the global order, much like what happened during his first term. But now I think he's taking an even more hardline approach. So, not surprisingly, we're seeing these changes. I think among other things, BRICS could really get a boost out of what Trump has done. I think BRICS could become much more impactful on substantive levels than it has been to this point. But to your question about the RIC, I don't think we're there yet. Of course, India and Russia have a very special relationship, but for all we're talking about easing of tensions between India and China, I think that these two countries will continue to look at each other as strategic competitors. I mean, the border issue remains a major issue. You have a very long border that continues to remain in dispute, even though Prime Minister Modi said the situation has been normalized. You still have a situation where there's a lot of mistrust that's baked into the relationship because of that border issue. So I think it would be difficult to assume that you could have this new flowering of this triangle, this India, Russia, China triangle. I think that one side of that triangle, the India-China side, is very fragile, just because I don't think the two sides are ready to really strengthen their partnership in a way that you could actually have substantive trilateral three-way cooperation between the three, at least for now.
Okay, well, I agree that there is still deep distrust between India and China, but let me tell you that the misgivings that India now has about the United States of America have never been more serious in decades, because the United States, through its recent conduct, has definitely shown that it is a very unreliable partner. On that note, Michael Kugelman, thanks very much for joining me on Global Pulse tonight.
Thank you, and sorry that I can't hear the other two distinguished speakers, but thank you for having me. All the best.
We look forward to having you back on the show. Thank you, Michael. All right, let me now take this back to our other guests who've been listening in patiently. Dr. Swaran Singh, let me begin with you. You heard Michael Kugelman there. Yes, of course, it's not as if India and China are now suddenly the best of friends. we have a deep-rooted issue with that country, especially as far as our border dispute is concerned. But it's also true, like I said, that India's misgivings about the United States of America today are really at their peak. What do you make of the thaw that we now see in India-China ties? How significant do you think is the Chinese Foreign Minister's visit to India and the fact that the Indian Prime Minister is expected to visit China later this month for the SCO summit? It'll be his first visit to China in 7 years. Do you believe all of this in some way is being catalyzed by Trump's bullying of the world and India in particular?
Thank you, Neha, for having me on your show. I would not rule out the fact that Trump's tariff tirades have definitely added to the impulse of working out their relationship relatively faster than they would have otherwise, which, as Michael said, goes back to October, if not before, whereas Trump's inauguration and term begins from 20th of January. Sometimes Western countries and experts there do not fully understand how India and China are able to connect with each other. For example, you have seen how in Ukraine war, United States had burnt all its bridges. I mean, they were only looking at how to fight war with Russia, and absolutely no efforts being made to explore peace until this summit meeting that you mentioned in your opening remarks. Now compare this with China and India, which at the peak of border tensions following Galwan incidents in June of 2020 were witnessing their trade constantly going up. Chinese even claimed for 1 year, I think 2021 or 2022, it went up by 40% or so. This year again, notice that between April and July, Indian exports, though very limited, have gone up by 20% compared to last year's April-July mark. So India and China are able to calibrate their complex relationship continuously like a mosaic with multiple colors moving simultaneously. Now, in that, therefore, important to understand that Trump's tariffs mark only one limited stimuli and cannot define or redefine India-China relations, which I agree with you will have enormous concerns. You heard both Dr. Jaishankar now in his meeting with the Wang Yi yesterday and earlier in July in Beijing. He openly, publicly said that India has concerns that he often shares with Chinese leaders, and they need to be addressed. That is, there is no doubt. Both these are largest population countries, extremely rapidly transforming societies and economies. China, of course, is 6 times bigger economy and has bigger axe to grind with the United States because of that. But their momentum is going to always be piecemeal and not in a super speed kind of transformation from either being adversary or being partner in that sense. Indeed, I'm saying partnerships and contestations and confrontations will continuously move all the time simultaneously. The current flavor or the flair, it seems to be one of gradually thawing of the relationship, which is noticing that they are both trying to work out a whole new chapter of mutual confidence building exercise. They have both sides started several piecemeal initiatives which will fructify over a period of time. And therefore, I think there is a new mood in the relationship in which whether Trump's tariffs, let's say, reduce tomorrow and how much impact they will have to this India's and China's excitement to work together will have a limited bandwidth. But that is a factor for sure, but not something that completely defines how India deals with China or how China deals with India. They see themselves as partners in one point in time in one sector. They see themselves competing point in time in another sector. And I think that unique mosaic kind of relationship Chinese and Indians have come to understand. And they have come to live with it. And I think that is what makes it always possible that their skirmishes, their angers, their violent face-offs are still very, very limited all the time. every life is important, but despite having world's longest disputed boundary on the planet, they have, I think, managed it fairly well. They have not resolved it as of now, but it's a unique relationship, and I think that is something that I always wish to underline.
All right. Let me take this to Einar Tangen. Mr. Tangen, you know, I understand that geopolitics is complex and cannot be seen through the prism of reductionist binaries. But I'm still going to play the devil's advocate and ask you this question. Do you believe that the accelerated thawing of India-China ties that we are currently witnessing is on account of the fact that the two countries now increasingly look at Donald Trump-led United States of America as a common adversary?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I would agree with my professor saying, I mean, this is a situation where you have two neighbors. They have issues. They've been trying to work them out. Remember, the October agreement was well before anything that Trump did. I think you have to look a little bit deeper. You'll see that Donald Trump's rhetoric about China changed slightly in the campaign mode. He started talking about BRICS. And he said on a number of occasions, he's tried to minimize it and say, oh, it's nothing. And then at the same time, he says, I'm going to put an extra 10% on all countries associated with BRICS. And on top of that, if they do anything about currency, 100%. So let's look at the pattern here. India is not alone. Brazil was hit with 50% for the idea that somehow they're not allowed to try a leader who tried to, subvert their democracy. They also hit South Africa. These are the five main countries. Russia is still on the bubble. Even today, Donald Trump was saying if Putin doesn't give in, if he doesn't make peace, it's going to be bad for him. And he repeats the same thing about China. So there's an unmistakable pattern here. And why? Because those five countries, plus the new five countries, includes Indonesia, UAE, etc., they represent 40% of the world's GDP. They represent the majority of resources, land, people, markets, and together they represent 4 times as much manufacturing as the United States. So Donald Trump likes to play up this idea that he who has the power can make the rules. But in this particular case, if these 10 countries come together, not to single the US out for military or anything like that, but simply to go to him and said, this is nonsense. You can't put 180 tariffs on countries, including a bunch of confused penguins. All right. And you can't do secondary things based on what you think is, like 50%. What did India do to Donald Trump? And I don't buy this, they didn't give him credit for settling something he didn't settle. All right. That cannot be the issue because this is going back further. It has to be BRICS. BRICS is what keeps Washington up at night. Any kind of grouping like this ends American exceptionalism and hegemony. This is why they're afraid. This is why they're trying to put some sort of barrier between Russia and China. Right? This is why they are picking on BRICS countries. So I think you have to see this in the lens that India has a choice now. They can be a leader in the vein of the whole non-alignment movement, which it created, and take the world, and I mean by the world, the countries that suffered under colonial imperialism, into a new multipolar reality. And this is not about teaming up with China. It's about teaming up with 10 countries to put one country that refuses to understand that their time has passed, that they cannot dictate in Washington what happens in Delhi or Moscow, Beijing, all right, or Doha. In UAE. So, it is time to put these things aside, to see this clearly for what it is. This is fear by the American administration about the end of an era for America.
Trump cannot come to terms with the fact that the American empire is in decline. And it's interesting you say that the kind of treatment that he has meted out to India can't be only on account of India denying him a nomination for a Nobel Peace Prize. But then what you say about BRICS is interesting. So let me take this to Dr. Swaran Singh. Dr. Singh, let's talk about BRICS and let's talk about Rick. You know, Einar Tangen says BRICS is what keeps Trump up at night. We know that BRICS is a huge red rag as far as Trump is concerned. He sees it as nothing but an anti-America alliance, which stands for only de-dollarization. But again, what explains singling out India in the manner that he has, given that China is a very important member of BRICS, and obviously Trump has decided to be much kinder to China than he has been to India. Of course, we can also attribute that to China's economic might, which cannot be ignored by anybody, including Donald Trump. But really, is it about BRICS at the end of the day? Do you agree with Einar's assessment there? And also, do you believe that Rick is an idea whose time has come?
I'm not sure what keeps Donald Trump awake at night. That's a difficult guess to make.
The fantasy of a
But
Nobel Peace Prize would be my guess.
But definitely, Neha, what is true is that if you look around the world, BRICS has emerged as a new kid on the block, the most exciting kind of an arrangement, which fits in the bill when the world is getting fatigued by the post-World War II arrangements for global governance, whether it is Bretton Woods or it is United Nations or it is other whole set of multilateral bodies that we have, which have created whole sorts of difficulties at global level, whether it is climate change or it is terrorism or it is pandemics or it is refugees and movement of population, secured uneven development and so on. So world is looking at alternatives is where BRICS have become very exciting platform, which we have seen already have moved from original 5 to now 11 members. Another 10 countries are added as trade partners. There are definitely another 18 to 22 nations who have shown interest to join it. So sometimes it looks like potentially a mini United Nations, which could cover as much as 85% of global population, potentially, of course. But as of now, BRICS remains fairly limited in terms of its bandwidth, limited in terms of its influence. The United States definitely is world's largest economy, very, very powerful military-industrial complex, and so on. You know, a very innovative and leader in several sectors in technology. Second point is that within BRICS, again, there are disjunctions that continue. And for example, China alone, has an economy which is bigger than rest of the BRICS combined, which brings China enormous influence, but also brings in a certain amount of skepticism among other members. I would not say India doesn't have that kind of skepticism as to where Chinese would like to take BRICS in coming times, use it as a platform for their Belt and Road Initiative, use it as a platform to emerge as a leader for global South and so on. In that sense, size creates a certain, issues and challenges within BRICS. And that is also something that Trump realizes. Now, the fundamental thing why Trump has separated Russia and India to punish them and be relatively, easy on China is simple because, as you mentioned yourself, the economic heft of China today is almost matching United States. You can identify between 2 to 3 dozen now sectors in technology where China is showcasing lead over United States. So what is the lesson for United States? Not to allow India or Russia to move in that direction where in that competitive, sort of situation, India will also stand up. Indian Prime Minister has already stood up, for example, to address concerns of dairy, of fishery, of agriculture, saying that those are not sectors that India will open. And there is an example in 2018, India walked out of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, after 3 years of constant negotiations because India could not compromise on labor-intensive areas to be opened up. So that is the concern Trump has, other than his being whiffed with India not recognizing his claims 3 dozen times of mediation, etc., etc. The real concern that he has is 133% of debt over GDP that United States has, nearly $1 trillion trade deficit that United States has, compared to the Chinese, for example, who are nearly $1 trillion surplus in their trade around the world. So those are serious things that keep Trump awake at night is how I will look at it. And then in BRICS, he's showcasing that anxiety and anger as to why these countries are coming together. Definitely, we in India believe that Chinese and to some extent Russians want to, create that hype of de-dollarization. India doesn't believe in de-dollarization. Even euro could not achieve de-dollarization. I don't think a BRICS currency can achieve de-dollarization. Dollar is dominant even now, despite a gradual decline. Still, 88% of global trade is in dollar. 59% of global foreign exchange reserves are in dollar. So India has emerged over a period of time as a voice of sanity and restraint. We want to expand use of local currencies in BRICS, but at the same time, India is also sitting in quadrilateral security framework where India doesn't want to allow anti-China tirades, and again wants to play that. That I think it's very civilizational to play that golden mean, and restraint and sanity is how India today sits in both Quad and in BRICS in that sense. But Trump's anxieties are driven by those economic trends that are making acceleration in that relative decline of United States, and BRICS looks like an easy target to sort of criticize. India, Russia look like easy targets to sort of slap tariffs and sanctions. China is a different ball game altogether, and I think those are issues that are complicating the relationship.
All right. Interesting. So let me take this back to Einar Tangen. Einar Tangen, you seem to believe that BRICS is what keeps Donald Trump at night. Dr. Swaran Singh seems to think that it is the US debt that keeps Donald Trump awake at night. But let's now look ahead. We've seen the two-day visit of the Chinese foreign minister to India. I think the talks have been very positive, going by the statements that have come from both sides. As we speak, India's external affairs minister is in Moscow. He's going to hold talks with his Russian counterpart 2 days from now. We know that at the end of this month, Prime Minister Modi is going to travel to China to attend the SCO summit. And there's a very strong possibility that Prime Minister Modi and President Xi will hold talks on the sidelines of the SCO summit. And then, if all goes well, President Putin is very likely to visit India later this year. So my question is, how do you see these various developments panning out over the next few days, weeks and months, even as negotiations for a peace deal in Ukraine carry on between Trump, Russia, Zelensky and the European Union?
Well, I mean, speculation is we could do all we want, but let's look at the little recent history. All right, Donald Trump convened this very quickly, and I think one of the things keeping him up is somebody named Epstein and a bunch of files that obviously he's been named in. So let's be clear about that. I think long term he's concerned about both issues that myself and the professor has talked about. But what did he do? He didn't really sit down with anybody. He convened this meeting. He didn't have a game plan. He showed up. It looked disorganized. It was cut in half. There were supposed to be 4 hours. It only took 2. Putin walked off. And to a lot of people, it looked like Putin was the winner here. He'd broken this international taboo against dealing with Russia by dealing with Donald Trump. He certainly had put his ideas forward, and Donald Trump seemed to be an errand boy who said, well, I have a lot of things to do. Deal isn't done till it's done. And he's the one who's calling up, Zelensky and Europe. Now, how you have a peace plan without two of the major parties. I don't know. But that's Donald Trump's idea all the time. Let's seize the moment and the optics, and who cares what happens after that? I tried. And but what did Putin do? Putin, before and after, contacted 15 countries, including India, briefed each one as to what was going on. All BRICS countries were included. So what does this tell you about the state of affairs today? You have somebody like, whether you like him or not, Putin is a master of chess. He is somebody who understands the game. He's been able to defy the United States. He pushed back against what he saw as an incursion into an area, Ukraine, where he had clearly said, you go in there and there's going to be a fight. Now, I feel sorry for the Ukrainian people, especially as the Europeans say, well, we're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. I'm sure that's a lot of comfort. The people now, who over 60% want a negotiated peace in Ukraine. So looking at how things are developing internationally, I still go back to this idea that BRICS is becoming a reality pushed by Donald Trump, that in the situation between China and India, the most important part is whether or not they're going to cooperate to make this bully stand down. I respect Dr. Singh, but he did not give a clear-eyed idea of how India is supposed to handle the United States. And the fact is, it's an asymmetrical relationship. America is much bigger than India, and it's showing that by scoffing at it, by interfering in elections, making deals with Pakistan, openly, interfering in Bangladesh, claiming that he somehow settled a conflict that he didn't. These are all things that show a complete disregard for India and for Modi. So I don't know how you can say, well, this is all kind of pass over, things will go back to normal. Donald Trump was elected twice, not once. So you go back, all right, to this idea that somehow the U.S. is going to change. Well, at the next election, presidential election, they will. It'll probably swing way to the left. But what happens in America? It goes from left to right. So you're probably going to run into these.
Talking about 4 more years. Never mind the fact that the American Constitution doesn't allow for it.
Let us say there are a few constitutional issues there, but as a lawyer, I can brief you on that if you're interested.
And he was actually showing off 4 more years merchandise to the European leaders who were at the White House to hold talks about ending the Russia-Ukraine war. But that apart, Dr. Swaran Singh, I'm sure you want to reply to the points that Einar Tangen has made, including the one where he said that, if you could just spell out for us how you think India needs to deal with this United States problem, given that it is largely an asymmetrical relationship. Also, very quickly for our viewers, I want to mention here that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has put out a tweet saying, and I quote, "Glad to meet the Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, since my meeting with President Xi in Kazan last year. India-China relations have made steady progress, guided by respect for each other's interests and sensitivities. I look forward to our next meeting in Tianjin on the sidelines of the SCO summit. Stable, predictable, constructive ties between India and China will contribute significantly to regional as well as global peace and prosperity." Dr. Swaran Singh, your thoughts on what the Prime Minister has tweeted, and then of course you can respond to Mr. Tangen.
I think it's a very significant meeting that happened between Wang Yi, who's a very senior leader, Politburo member, and Prime Minister of India. And the fact that he tweeted on it soon after the meeting is a very, very, I think, positive sign of which way the relationship is going. And the fact that we are all expecting a possible bilateral between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi. And whenever these national leaders meet, there is always a possibility of a couple of major announcements to be made, and we are looking forward to that as a possibility also. So in that sense, yes, it is showcasing increasing synergization of relationship on both sides. And we are all in agreement that Trump's tariffs definitely have contributed to it. We have seen both Wang Yi and the Chinese ambassador in Delhi using the word bullying as a
Oh,
threat
yes.
to global stability, and how India and China must work together to ensure that global stability and so on. But let me come back to the question of how will India deal with United States. Two ways one can answer this question. One, let us look at how the world is dealing with the President Donald Trump. Neha, you just mentioned half a dozen European leaders lining up into the White House today to accompany President Zelensky, fearing that otherwise President Trump could, somehow force Zelensky to agree on things that could be counterproductive for their own security in future, could embolden Russia, and so on. But most of the world leaders, you have noticed, even when President Trump makes a direct personal aspersions and very crude comments, we have not seen world leaders responding in the same language or taking a confrontationist approach. Chinese have been the one who have stood up, almost edging on confrontation, but not even confronting. So, India is not going to confront President Trump and use the same language as he's using, whereas continue to negotiate with him, continue to explore other possibilities of working together, which are beyond the trade tariffs. That's one strategy India will take as to how we will move forward. We have already moved sufficiently forward in opening up several things which should propitiate his concerns and anxieties about trade deficit vis-a-vis India, which is $45 billion compared to nearly 300 billion with China. So India has, from the very beginning, the fact that in February Indian Prime Minister went and saw him, Indian Foreign Minister was there at the inauguration itself. Indian budget shows a certain relief in tariffs, etc., etc. India has followed the trend that world is following. That's one way of looking at it. Second way of looking at it, this is not the first time when India and United States have got into trouble with each other. Archival research now shows what was happening between President Nixon and Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the kind of language at that time that was used to describe her and so on. She stood her, sort of point of view strongly, and we saw what happened. More recently, in 1998, India again conducted nuclear tests, and the total freeze of relationship that followed. It took 14 rounds of dialogues between Jaswant Singh and Stop Talbot, piecemeal approach. And I think Chinese also have a very piecemeal approach and indirect approach to deal with major concerns at global level. And therefore, I think it's interesting to see that India is not in a hurry to resolve these issues. It will take its own time, and over a period of time it will happen. Let me quickly mention now the RIC issue. RIC, if you remember, started in early 1990s, Primakov's idea, as he was flying out of Delhi in 1990. Russia needs RIC because China and India, as second largest and fourth largest economies, if they are seen endorsing and standing with Putin, his global stature is assured. Otherwise, it's a 1.8 trillion economy. It's a very small economy otherwise. And the fact that entire Western world is pushing him to the wall, it is very important for Russia to revive RIC. China is also excited because China wants to keep Russia on its side, and Russia and China have similar views on various global issues. In many, many cases, India also, along with Russia and China, have similar views on how global challenges have to be addressed and understood. India now, given these trade tariffs, would be relatively at comfort in letting the narrative of RIC move forward. And we could see this meeting happening in Tianjin at end of this month between Putin, Xi
President
Jinping,
Putin will
and
be
Indian
there.
Prime Minister.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, the three could at least give some kind of illusion that RIC is coming back into action. But again, India's approach will be restrained, is how I see it.
Okay, so let me put that to Einar Tangen as we wrap up this discussion. Mr. Tangen, I'll give you the last word. What do you make of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tweet about his meeting with the Chinese Foreign Minister? He says he looks forward to meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the SCO summit. We know that President Putin is going to be there too. Do you believe that this is as good a time as any for the construct of RIC, to be given all power that it needs?
Well, as I keep saying, I think it goes beyond RIC. It goes to BRICS, which is a far more powerful group. And quite frankly, Modi has already stood next to Putin, embraced him, especially after the election interference that happened here. I mean, I understand the professor's idea that, look, you just should, just take it, just flatter Donald Trump, give him a Nobel Peace Prize, things. I don't know if the Indian public would like this idea of kowtowing to Washington, but maybe that's what he's suggesting. The other thing is this idea, oh, well, take the long view. Well, there's a lot of people who are going to suffer over the long view. $45 billion is a lot of money. All right. The trade with the U.S. is going to be hard to replace. So I don't think that there is a real solution there. I do believe that BRICS represents the best solution for India, not because it's cooperating with China, but because it's cooperating with the global South, leading the world towards a multipolar world. As I said, adhering to the idea that there should be a world that is free from being dictated to by former colonial masters.
All right. I think the point that Dr. Swaran Singh actually was making is that India has stood up to the United States in the past. It's doing it now and will do it in the future as well if the need arises. But yes, these are very interesting times. We have some very important summits coming up. Let's see what comes of it. On that note, Ainar Tangan and Dr. Swaran Singh, thanks so much for joining me on Global Pulse tonight.
Thank you.
All right. So as we just mentioned, the Chinese foreign minister is now wrapping up his two-day visit to India. But remember, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visits China at the end of this month for the SCO summit, which will also be attended by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Are we going to see the construct of RIC being given a fresh lease of life? Watch this space for more. Thanks very much for watching Global Pulse tonight. Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. After years of friction, is the India-China relationship witnessing a reset thanks to the relentless onslaughts on India's economy and strategic autonomy by US President Donald Trump? China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is currently visiting India, and the visit is being widely seen as an attempt by both countries to repair and strengthen bilateral ties that were severely damaged by the deadly border clashes in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh in June of 2020. This comes at a time when Trump has unleashed the terror of tariffs on the world, especially with the clear intent to brazenly target India, thereby triggering uncertainty everywhere. In the course of his two-day visit to New Delhi, the Chinese Foreign Minister has met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. The statements that have emanated from the two sides sound reassuring and promising. As per the statement issued by the Chinese side, Wang Yi told Jaishankar, the world is undergoing a once-in-a-century transformation at an accelerating pace and dealing with bullying. In fact, in a clear reference to the United States and Trump, though they were not named, the Chinese foreign minister said, unilateral bullying is rampant and free trade and the international order face severe challenges. He went on to say, that as the two largest developing countries, India and China should set an example for others by uniting, strengthening themselves and promoting a multipolar world. Wang Yi added, the two countries should view each other as partners and opportunities rather than adversaries or threats. Pointing to the resumption of dialogue between the two neighbors and recent peace in the border areas, the Chinese Foreign Minister said the bilateral ties are on a positive trend. Jaishankar told his Chinese counterpart, having seen a difficult period in our relationship, our two nations now seek to move ahead. This requires a candid and constructive approach. We must be guided by the three mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Differences must not become disputes nor competition, conflict. Significantly, ahead of this visit, China took the decision to lift its export restrictions on fertilizers, rare earth minerals, and tunnel boring machines. It has begun the shipment of these critical items to India, addressing concerns that had been raised by New Delhi in the past.